Hello, welcome to our first general session of day 3. There's been so many things happening at the virtual family gathering this year that I feel like we've been sort of meeting for weeks because there's been so much activity and so many different opportunities for people to be engaged and to interact with one another and to get involved. But it's also sad because it's day 3 and that means our time together virtually here is coming to an end. But I'm thankful that we're such a connected community and that we all stay connected to one another, especially through many of the social media channels. So if you are not following the IFOPA on one of our social media channels, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I hope that you will connect with us. And don't forget to make sure you're signed up for our newsletter at ifopa.org/connect. So again, I'm Michelle Davis. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm the Executive Director of the International FOP Association, and we're here today for the session, Patient and Family Involvement in the Drug Development and Approval Process. I'll go over a few quick housekeeping notes. You'll see the chat. That's a great opportunity for you to connect with one another today. It's not the place to put your questions. We hope that you'll click on the Q&A tab and add your questions in the Q&A tab, and you're invited to add those as the session is happening. So when that pops into your mind with a question, go ahead and add it and we'll collect those and answer your questions at the end. If you need translation services, we have AI translation, translation through words using the Wordly tab. And there are 21 different languages that are available. So you'll just click on that tab and select your language. If you speak Portuguese or Spanish, we have live translation for you, and that is at the Interprify tab. So if you click on that, you'll select your language and you should begin hearing the audio translation. One of the other key features of this session is that you'll want to look at the handouts tab. You'll be able to access the slides, but what's really special is that Laura's the organization that Laura works with has provided a great handout about what to ask when you're interested in a clinical trial, a guide for patients. So you'll want to make sure that you put that in your, I think it's called the suitcase in the app, in the Intrado virtual event platform, but you'll want to make sure that you add that. So that wraps up our housekeeping notes for this morning. I'm excited to have the opportunity to moderate this session and to introduce you to Laura Iliescu. She is the Associate Director of Patient Advocacy Strategy at the Center for Rare Diseases for ICON. It's really exciting. Laura's actually been in the virtual app. She's been listening to some of the recordings of previous sessions so that she could really help tailor her presentation today. She is going to talk today about patient involvement in clinical trials and the drug development process, and also what to consider when you're deciding if a clinical trial for you is right for you, and in our case, so what are some tips for deciding which clinical trial is right for you? Because we know that we're going to be soon in a situation where there are multiple clinical trials running for our FOP community. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Michelle. I am absolutely honored to be here with you today. I hope I've got to the right slide here. There we go. My name is Laura Iliescu. I am an Associate Director of Patient Advocacy Strategy at ICON PLC, which is a company that runs clinical trials. And I work specifically in the Center for Rare Diseases. And I have spent the near 20 years of my career working for companies that develop drugs, that bring them to market. And I've had the honor and privilege of working with many rare disease communities as they undertake this journey of clinical research and what comes after. I am also someone who's personally affected by rare disease. My partner is affected by hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia. We're part of the HHT community, and we've been navigating our own rare disease journey for the past 6 years. I have had an incredible time listening to the presentations, like Dr. Kaplan's really powerful talk, for which I learned so much yesterday. And like Dr. Kaplan, I will try to speak with you not just about what lies ahead in terms of facts and science and clinical trials and beyond, but also to speak to you a little bit from the heart. So I do want to make sure that I let you know that what I am sharing with you today is based on my personal experiences and my professional and personal, and it does not reflect the opinions or positions of any of my previous work affiliations or current work affiliations. And this is not advice to you. This is simply me offering what I can from my personal journey, both professional and personal. So it is wonderful to meet you where you are today because it is an incredible time. It's incredible to see the pipeline of potential therapies that has been made possible by the collaboration between the FOP community, researchers, and pharmaceutical companies who you have been hearing from throughout the summit so far. With multiple clinical trials on the horizon, it is clear that this is a time where both hope and challenges are unprecedented. Dr. Kaplan referred to this stretch as a twilight zone where things are changing. There is much hope, but there are no guarantees yet. He very eloquently explained that this is partly tied to the fact that the same pathway that is involved in the targets that have been validated for new treatments, the BMP pathway, is also involved in nearly every other major organ system. And that's a huge challenge to developers of drugs to turn potential candidates that worked in a mouse model into something that works as it's intended to, only where it's intended to in individuals. Personally, I think of the drug development process as being like a long journey with some stages that have landscapes that are very different that we move through. And at each stage, you are traveling through different terrain, encountering different challenges. Often that journey starts in rare disease and something that feels like a desert, where individuals are just finding each other, just beginning to form communities and to look for things, any kind of scientific sign of which direction to travel in towards progress. And that is your preclinical and your discovery phase, where the basic research has been done, where you're getting those mouse models, and where you're looking for targets and validating those targets and promising drug candidates. These each have their own challenges. And the last part of that search is really the clinical trial phase. And that search, there's only one way out of that search, which is through the clinical trials. And that stretch to me is like traveling through a very deep mountain. You know where you're hoping to get, what potential a new treatment may have, but the road ahead, as Dr. Kaplan mentioned, is full of hills and valleys and unknown turns. And importantly, nobody has a perfectly detailed map for this stretch of the journey. So that takes some risk, and it takes some hope, and it takes some careful consideration. Each company's clinical trial design is like a plan for that journey, this important journey. They have a destination, they have endpoints, they know what benefits the potential treatment hopes to offer you, and they have charted a route that they hope will lead to the other side of this stretch, to reaching that treatment. Because as Dr. Kaplan emphasized, clinical trials themselves are not treatments. They are the very important high-stakes road to treatments. So with multiple trials on the horizon, you are going to have, and individuals in the community are going to have, several very important, promising journeys that they may be offered the opportunity to take part in. Multiple clinical trials. And individuals in communities, when you reach this point, start to face a different challenge that they didn't have before, a good problem to have, deciding if getting on board any of these journeys, any of these destinations is something that you want or are able to do. And deciding to take part in a trial is a very deeply personal decision. If this option is available to you, it's not always available to everybody, unfortunately, along this journey. But it is a deeply personal decision, and individuals who decide to take that journey are absolute heroes, absolute heroes. But so are the people who decide that that isn't the right choice for them to be able to thrive. And so are the people who don't get the opportunity to do that. I myself live in Canada, and certainly not every trial or study in hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia is available here. And there are many ways that individuals can continue to support research. Trials are one of them. Can continue to support progress through the clinical trial phase, whether they're in or not inside a trial. Important things like taking part in natural history studies if you have the opportunity, joining the registries, providing data at any opportunity that you have to support sponsors, to support communities, the IFOPA, in getting the evidence and data that they need to create a compelling picture of the disease and of what your needs are, because all of that will help in the future stages. In terms of some questions that I myself and my family ask ourselves when we're presented with clinical trial options, I think of it as a journey. So what am I signing up for? What is the intended destination is an important question that I ask myself. Is the intended destination a drug that hopefully does something that is important to me, makes a change, or offers something that is aligned with what would make the condition better and would improve the quality of my life? So is the promise something that is worthwhile for me? What will I have to do along that journey? Because clinical trials, as those of you who have taken part know, is not a free ticket to ride. As a participant in a clinical trial, you invest so much time, so much effort, you take on risk days and days. And every step of the way, you are aware that you are on that journey, not just yourself, but also your family and those around you. So understanding what will I have to do along the way and asking questions about that. Where will I have to go? What are the tests? How much time is that going to take? Importantly, what other options might I have to give up? And how do I feel about that? Because with participating in clinical trials, there is always a trade-off in terms of what you do and don't get to do. And things like, will I get help with travel, with childcare, with the many things that it takes to make being in this trial fit into our lives successfully for the long haul. And of course, the other really important question is what safety precautions have been planned. So I want to understand what will be done to monitor my loved one's safety along the way. And what will that look like in terms of, and I want to make sure that I trust the individuals who are going to be involved. Weighing each of these can take a lot of work and a lot of information. And for this, I really encourage you to lean on the incredible IFOPA, on each other who have had the experiences of taking part in trials, and on sponsors to provide information transparently and keep you up to date. And just being here and educating yourself today is amazing, is something amazing that each of you are doing. And just that is contributing to progress in this time. But you will need to keep doing that over and over again, because as new trials come about, as results from new trials come about, as some of them potentially move beyond the clinical trial phase into these last two phases, regulatory review and then what comes after, you're going to need to reassess information quickly and rapidly, because it's going to keep changing. And as you're deciding what's right for you and finding out what your options are, that information is going to keep changing. And about that, I would say that it is a marathon, not a sprint from this point forward. So caring for yourself and for your well-being in this stretch of clinical research, in the era of clinical research in FOP, is really just as important, because it is a marathon and not a sprint. So with that, I'll focus a little bit on the second half of my talk on what comes after. So for the trials that are successful, and hopefully many will be, the journey then continues through to the regulatory review phase. And that is a very important next step of the journey. That is basically where the sponsor will put together something called a new drug application, and then will present that to the FDA or the EMA or other regulators. And the new drug application is basically the story of the journey that was taken on that trial. Every little step along the way, the data was collected and will be looked at. When I joined the industry and the time of digital computing, and to have a sense of how much data that is, I remember learning that before computers, the data from clinical trials would be shipped to the FDA using a convoy of trucks, so multiple trucks that were completely filled with binders of papers and data. And then it would be up to the regulators to review those. So that story, all of that data that was collected from the trial, tells the story of the journey that was taken, whether it was safe, and whether it reached its final destination, which is a treatment that offers something of value. And this phase is incredibly important because the regulators are going to decide whether that journey that was taken is something that will be safe and worthwhile for everybody else to follow. So it's a huge, huge responsibility, and it does take some time. The NDA will eventually, the data contained in that will eventually help regulators, along with other information, will eventually help regulators to decide who the drug is useful for and in what circumstances it should be used, and what precautions or considerations should be applied if it is used. So very, very important phase, and this can take quite a bit of time. So beyond the clinical trial, what happens next is the sponsor will have conversations with the regulators, and you've heard sponsors, individuals from different companies mention their ongoing discussions with regulators. And these are very, very important because they set the scene. And they will then prepare the NDA, provide it to the regulator when ready after they have analyzed the data, trucks and trucks worth of information. So it takes some time to do that, which can be very frustrating for individuals. This is home stretch, and often home stretch can feel like the longest stretch. That data will then be taken up by a team of reviewers that the regulator has assembled. And there are opportunities that I'll highlight later for individuals in the community to participate in that process of reviewing that data and interpreting that data. And this is where having all of the data possible about what's important and what's meaningful to individuals affected by FOP is really critical. Things that you've done like the listening session with the FDA, because those reviewers need to know this as they consider everything, because they themselves probably are not the experts that you are in what is meaningful and important to you. Beyond that, the steps are definitely to review that data and then to perform a number of inspections. And then if everything is found to be positive, or if the decision is made that it is worthwhile, that the data supports that this is safe and efficacious treatment that is worthwhile, then an approval will be granted. And it's important to mention that sponsors cannot begin to manufacture and commercialize any kind of treatments before they are granted that approval. So this next step is very, very important and takes some time to get through. Beyond that begins the preparation for commercialization. And that review process can typically take 2 to 3 years, but thankfully, through the lobbying efforts of rare disease communities, there are now multiple pathways and multiple ways that regulators have found to shorten that review time, so that when promising data has emerged from a clinical trial, that review can take place as quickly as possible. It never feels fast enough, however. So it's listening to all of the talks and presentations over the last couple of days. It's very clear that the FOP community, the IFOPA, and sponsors are collaborating tremendously through the start of the clinical trials phase prior to that, and will continue to do that. And that's wonderful and incredibly encouraging to see, because it really will take working together to get through it. Beyond that, that's not the end of the story for the patient community. In the next steps, it's really, really important that patients remain close to sponsors and to regulators, offering data and information where necessary, and identifying different ways to support the dialogue and conversations and due diligence that each of them have to do. And for this, I would encourage you to remain very close to the IFOPA and your patient communities, because a lot of important information and opportunities are going to arise for you to contribute to that. So it is definitely not the end of the story. I'm having some trouble here. Okay. In fact, the approval itself is not the end of the story, because when you have a treatment that has made it to this far, you still need to continue to monitor what happens when everyone is taking it. So far, a number of individuals have been on that journey in clinical trials, but there are other individuals who will then take that journey. And it's just as important to find out what their journey has been like, so that you identify any other benefits or any other risks of the treatment. And so it's very, very important that in the next phases, individuals continue to work with their care teams and continue to work with sponsors to provide that data and provide that information as to what their experiences are. Beyond the regulatory approval, there's the very important step in many countries of negotiating with payers and helping payers to understand the impact of the condition and the benefit of that drug. And that is a conversation that advocates and patients and everyone has a big stake in. And that's something that is often undertaken together collaboratively by sponsors, researchers, patients, and their community representatives. And once that has been done and the drug is then available, that too is not the end of the story. Now that you have an approval, when you have access, and the drug is made available through the hard work and efforts of many, there's still a lot more to do. There is the task of bringing that drug into the clinic, or bringing that new therapy into the clinic. And that takes manufacturing and scaling up, oftentimes on the part of the sponsors. And that also takes working with sites and hospitals and medical centers and specialists who were not part of the trial, but who are going to be providing that treatment to a wider group of people to learn about that treatment, to implement the care pathways that accompany that treatment, making sure that that the processes are in place for individuals to be monitored the way they need to be monitored when they're on that treatment. And of course, that all important continuing data collection about other people's journeys continues to take place and is incredibly important. So during every stretch, and especially in that stretch, it's very important to be guided by your healthcare team, engaging with your healthcare team, reporting anything that you feel is of a concern to you, and asking for information throughout every step of the process. I will just quickly close by saying that you are very fortunate in the FOP community, that there are so many wonderful sources of information and so many individuals, as you saw earlier in the sessions. I highly encourage you to take advantage of that, to educate yourself, and to continue to stay close to the developments that are coming, because that is really the best way to make sure that you are ready to assess your options when they are presented to you. That is the approach that we take, and it makes us feel good. But certainly, above all else, trust yourself. If something is not right for you, or if something feels right for you and your family, ultimately, you've got to make that decision for yourself and trust yourself. And with that, I'm going to conclude and open up to any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for going through that presentation with us. Yeah, it's one thing to have the work experience scenario, but when you're living it, it brings a totally new perspective. Maybe we could start. Could you talk a little bit about the handout that we included for patients about making decisions? There's a great checklist that you have in the back. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Thank you. And thank you for including that. The Center for Rare Diseases at ICON, we have a rare disease advisory committee with a lot of advocates from different rare diseases. And they've talked to us a lot about the things that they wish they had known to ask about clinical trials. So questions that go beyond just what does this potential drug do? But even questions that they could ask themselves, like, if I have to go into a clinic and make my way there every 2 weeks, can I do this? And what kind of support will I get for doing this? Questions like, if I don't pass the screening eligibility requirement the first time, do I have a second shot at it or not? There are just a lot of questions and how do I feel about that? And there's just a lot of really important considerations about fitting a trial into your life that are not obvious if you haven't done it before. And so based on their experiences and expertise, we drafted this What to Ask guide that really takes you through some questions that you can ask anybody who's talking to you about a clinical trial to help you understand how it fits into your life. If you're going to be in that center all day long and you have special dietary requirements that you need a fridge, are you going to have access to a fridge? If you need Wi-Fi while you're in clinic to do some work while your loved one is going through their tests, are you going to have that? These are really important considerations, and it's important to communicate those to the team of researchers on site as well, because it may not be obvious to them. And this is why it's so important to speak up and to ask these questions, because as strange as it might seem to you, it's not always obvious to the people at the site either.
Yeah. That's one of the things that the IFOPA does. Yesterday, for people that were able to see Danielle's presentation, one of the things we talk about is that our research team, I say team, like there's a whole bunch of us. It's Danielle and myself primarily that are having these conversations with them. But one of the things that we will do is, as we're talking with pharmaceutical companies that are developing trials, we'll say, do you understand that our patients must have a caregiver with them? That our patients need different accommodations. If they need to fly to a trial site, they need different accommodations on an airplane, that they require different accommodations in a hotel room, that for some people, they may have, a job that is compromised, if not locked. And so, the food needs that they have are different. So we really do a lot to educate the pharmaceutical companies that are working on these trials to make sure they understand what life is like when you live with FOP, so that they're developing trials that make sense. And I think if you were in the session on Friday, one of the things that Dr. Kurt Brown from Insight mentioned is, we heard that, we know that intramuscular injections are not possible, but we also heard that there's a great degree of concern in the community and anxiety about blood draws. So they began to look, that was one of the earliest conversations we had with them, and they began to look for alternative ways to manage blood draws. So in their trial, they'll be using, not always, there will still be some blood draws, but they will also be using a saliva test. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do. But a lot of these decisions, to Laura's point, are individual, and they're what works for you and your family. And you will, yesterday there was a question, or maybe it was Friday, there was a question about, who do I communicate with about the trial? Am I actually talking to a pharmaceutical company, or, I'm talking with a study coordinator or a principal investigator or an FOP expert? So can you talk a little bit about, Laura, about the conversations you have with the study coordinator and what their role is, or with your doctor? How do you have those conversations?
Certainly. So it can take different forms for different people. If hopefully you've got a specialist who's really on it and giving you that information proactively. But that's certainly not the case. Just as often, there are individuals who are monitoring clinicaltrials.gov and contacting either sites. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, or when you're presented information about a trial on any search engine, you will usually see there's a contact. There's like a contact that's listed. Sometimes that's the site, but just as often it's not the site, meaning not the hospital and the principal investigator. There'll be like a central contact, and that could be somebody within the pharmaceutical company and their medical team who is monitoring that and responding to questions. And in some cases, it might even be like a company like ourselves or another one that is providing a patient navigation service. So you could be talking to any number of different folks who are involved in different way. And eventually you will end up speaking to a coordinator for the trial. And that person sits within the site, they're a medical professional within the site. They work with the primary investigator who is leading that research at the site. And it is the coordinator's job to answer all of your questions and to make sure that you are given everything that you need in terms of information, informed consent to decide whether or not this study is for you. So coordinators can be some of the most wonderful people in the world and can provide that information, but they can't be mind readers. And so if something is really important to you, you just have to really make sure that you ask that question, you insist on that answer, because they may not have that information handy. But if you say to them, this is really important to me, can you find out what this would be like in the study? Then they can at least go and track down that information and provide you an answer before you decide whether or not you want to go through this really long screening process. Sometimes you might also have a navigator who's involved, so some other individual might be involved who is just helping you to navigate the other commitments that you have in the trial, such as booking travel and things like that. So you might be working with a coordinator to support you doing that, but most likely you'll probably be supported with that part of the trial with somebody else, from someone else. So the important thing is to advocate for yourself. Coordinators are also very, very busy people. And it's unfortunately really important that at the end of the day, you get the information that you need to make that decision, and ask yourself the question when you're told you would have to do this X, Y, Z in the trial. If I had to do this, how hard or easy would this be for me? Am I okay with this? And remember that you get to make that decision. And for a lot of people, and in a lot of rare disease communities, will tell you that this is a question you ask yourself every damn day of that trial. You will ask yourself, am I doing the right thing today? And so that's something that you're going to review over and over and over again, and that's completely fine. And whatever decision you make that day is the right decision for you, whether you decide to stay on or not to stay on in the trial. The important thing is advocating for yourself and making sure that you're doing what's right for you.
Absolutely. Okay. We'll just give a second in case there are any other questions. I'm excited for everyone to get in and check out the handout and download that. I mentioned this yesterday, but I'll mention it again in case there's anyone new joining today, is that we do have a special section of our website. It's ifopa.org/FOP-news, NEWS. And that is where we put any announcements being made by the International Clinical Council on FOP, whether it's a statement on COVID or statement on clinical trials or updated FOP treatment guidelines. But that is also where we put any announcements from the pharmaceutical companies. So if you went on there, I think that page has been up since 2016, you would see a history of the last 5 years of what's been happening in development and FOP. But if you ever have a question about, what are the latest announcements from the pharmaceutical companies, that is the best place for you to go and find that. We do release announcements that come from the pharmaceutical companies when their trials are posted on clinicaltrials.gov. Generally, when we hear that a first patient has been enrolled, we'll issue announcements or if a new trial site has been opened, we'll issue those announcements in our e-newsletter. We'll put those on our website, and we'll also put those on our social media, our 4 different social media applications that we use. So that's a great way for people to stay informed as well. Well, I think at this time, I don't know that we have any other questions. So I just want to thank you, Laura. You really dug into the FOP community and learned a lot about us and learned about the kind of the state of clinical development for our community. And we're grateful for the time and for you sharing your expertise with us. And again, thank you so much. You'll want to stay. We're going to stay in the theater. You may go take a quick break. We will reconvene at 12:30 Eastern Time. And the next session, we'll be talking about our family services programs and what's available to you. There's been an incredible, since we were together last year, we've launched our Advocacy series. So you're going to get to hear about that program that will continue in 2022. So you want to make sure you tune in for that program. And then at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have our session on fundraising and fundraising. And we've got a great panel of community fundraisers. So you don't want to miss hearing what your peers have to say about what they've been doing. And then at 3:10 Eastern Time, we will have our closing ceremonies all here in this general session theater. So you don't want to miss any of that. So grab a snack, and then we will see you again in a few minutes. Thank you again, Laura.
Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day.